Looks like it is now live on YouTube. Um, let's see if I can, there we go. All right, so I started looking at suttas. There was one in particular around Queen Mallikā that I wanted to share, and then I wanted more background on Queen Mallikā. And so I started looking through the suttas and then spilled over to the suttas about King Pasenadi, her husband. And frankly, we could probably spend a whole series on these. And since this is a sutta study, I'm going to focus on the suttas. There's also a lot of Jataka tales, commentary, and other things that help kind of flesh out the life of Queen Mallikā. I even found some scholarly articles that I collected, but I haven't had, one of them I just found this morning, so I have not read them in full. And then the Dictionary of Pali Proper Names kind of gives a synopsis that talks about what the other parts of the canon and the commentaries say about the queen. So if you're interested in the full story, there's even an illustrated on 7-part cartoon I found online that was both uplifting and somewhat like raised questions about the commentary and what is truly happening at the time of the Buddha and what might have been added later to justify the things that were happening in the suttas or the story, give backstory. But I think in general, historically, what we have is a woman who, young woman, she was I think about 16 when she met the king. And she had just done a generous act of giving her the lunch meal she'd packed for herself, it seems. She saw the Buddha and just felt so moved and then gave her meal to the Buddha. And one of the comic impacts of that kind act was she met the king and she continued in her acts of kindness toward the king. The king fell in love and that same day went and asked for her hand in marriage and installed her as his chief queen. So at that time, often the kings had many wives. So she became the foremost of the wives. So this sutta that jumped out at me is the one I wanted to share. I will do screen sharing, but I also have a bunch of other suttas queued up. So, okay, that's the live stream. Here is share. Share. I think we got it going now. All right, excellent. So this is the sutta with Queen Mallikā, and it's quite a famous sutta. It's quoted quite a bit because it's really telling about our nature and what's most forward-leading for our practice in regards to opinion of ourselves and the opinion of ourselves within the realm of our network of people. So remember, this queen, she'd been a daughter of a garland maker, and now she's been lifted into an eminent role in society as the queen. And King Pasenadi is really a major king of the time. There's a whole section in the suttas where he's interacting with the Buddha, and a lot of it talks about, he went and conquered this, he was in relation to that. So he was definitely well known, and King Pasenadi is also used by the Buddha often as a comparison. So he'll say, well, even King Pasenadi in his mightiness, this impacts the king, or would you not say that the king is foremost in? And those suttas generally are taking place within that kingdom. So it may be that if he's staying in King Bimbisara's land, he would use King Bimbisara. But we do know that King Pasenadi was a well-known figure at the time and respected as a king. So this sutta, we have the king and queen. They are up on a lot of the suttas call it the balcony. Here this is Bhante Sujata's translation, and he has them at the royal longhouse. So at Savatthi. Now at that time, King Pasenadi of Kosala was upstairs in the royal longhouse together with Queen Mallikā. Then the king said to the queen, Mallikā, is there anyone more dear to you than yourself? And this sutta appears more than once, the same wording, it appears in multiple collections. So was definitely spoken multiple times. Mallikā, is there anyone more dear to you than yourself? No, great king, there isn't. But is there anyone more dear to you than yourself? So she asks him, she owns that most dear is myself. And she's saying this to the man whom she loves. I mean, you see a lot of the interchanges, this real affection between the two of them. But he also lifted her from, I'm not quite sure what we would call the class system in that time, but maybe middle class to upper class, how we would name it today. And she's not saying, oh, you, my benefactor and my love, are the most dear to me. She's saying, no, there's no one more dear to me than myself. What about you? And the commentary does say that the king paused and thought about this, but here in the sutta it just goes directly to, for me also, Mallikā, there's no one. But King Pasenadi then left that residence and wanted to go run this by the Buddha, and we'll see in a couple other suttas this question that is raised by this couple as to where to place their own self-worth in the scheme of things, and is that universally so? So here then the king goes to the Buddha. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala came downstairs from the still longhouse, went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and told him what had happened. Then, understanding this matter, on that occasion the Buddha recited this verse. Having explored every quarter with the mind, one finds no one dearer than oneself. Likewise for others, each holds themselves dear. So one who cares for their own welfare would harm no other. Having explored every quarter with the mind. So the Buddha, looks out and contemplates this question. One finds no one dearer than oneself. So really putting the practice of myself, or for you, the practice of yourself foremost, is really in our nature. And that practice may be our wonderful, Buddhist practice toward liberation, or it could be that's the practice of seeking happiness in other matters. We're still trying to put ourselves in a position of well-being. Likewise for others, each holds themselves dear. So one who cares for their own welfare would harm no other. And there's a lot of material in the suttas that really go further on that. For caring for one's own welfare, you also don't harm others. And there's quite a number that we could have a wonderful discussion about, and maybe will at another time. Why is this so? This is something I would leave for each of us to contemplate. Why is it so that if I really care for my own welfare, that I would harm no one else? Why would I do no harm? Wouldn't getting rid of them be good for me? And really contemplating that, we can see, no, it's not so. especially when we're looking for what is the highest self-care. Now, in what manner can we most care for ourselves? And sometimes that may actually be what appears harmful. So in some of the suttas, it's that death is preferable to doing an unethical deed, is an example of that. So this is the underlying thing I wanted to bring out today, is that this cherishing ourselves in a wholesome way is our nature, and it's a path forward. Now, eventually we see through all of the conceits. But at this stage of like just people in the world, can we make an assumption that each care about themselves? Now, in our society, particularly in the Western world, and I think it's also beginning to change elsewhere as well, we see putting ourselves down, hating ourselves, really doing self-harm. And these things, I feel, are evolved from the delusions in our society that are really bending our minds. But even underneath that, when you look at, for myself, when I looked at, behaviors that were harmful to me, when I looked underneath, it was out of delusion I was acting that way. Underneath, there was some element of trying to care for myself, even if that care was wildly off base. So that's where wisdom needs to come into play. Okay, I'm going to go to, see which direction here. There's a couple of directions. I'm going to backtrack one little bit here to talk about the king and his relationship with the Buddha. So I believe you can still see, yes, just double checking, yes. Okay, so you can still see the screen. I've switched to that first sutta. I actually had mislabeled it as being in the Anguttara. It's in the Samyutta Nikaya. So this is that was the Samyutta Nikaya 3.8, which is the sutta where they're stating that they themselves are most loved. And this one is also in the Samyutta Nikaya in 3.1. This is a section of the Samyutta which are King Pasenadi plays a role in all of these. And that's also where we find suttas that include information about and inquiry from Queen Mallikā. Both also appear in other books of the canon. So this one, I'm not going to read the sutta in full. It's just to get a sense of the king and his relationship with the Buddha. So this is perhaps his first encounter, or definitely early on in his long relationship with the Buddha. So I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala went up to the Buddha and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, he sat down to one side and said to the Buddha, "Now, does the master Gautama claim to have awakened to the supreme perfect awakening?" So he's kind of questioning the Buddha, "Are you for real?" And the sutta goes through, a bunch of reasons why the Buddha is for real. And at the end of it, at the end of the sutta, we have that that standard type of phrase where this then King Pasenadi of Kosala said to the Buddha, "Excellent, sir, excellent," as if he were righting the overturned or revealing the hidden or pointing out the path to the lost or lighting a lamp in the dark so people with clear eyes can see what's there. The Buddha has made the teaching clear in many ways. I go for refuge to the Buddha, to the teaching, and to the mendicant Sangha. From this day forth, may the Buddha remember me as a lay follower who has gone for refuge for life." So obviously the question of his awakening, the answers were something that uplifted the king's heart. And this begins his relationship with the Buddha, where he goes for many teachings. His ministers go for teachings. He eventually invites Ananda to come to the palace and teach what's called the harem. Some of the women don't go outside of the compound, or if they do, even so, that sometimes it's best to have a tutor come in. And so Ananda was assigned. So can you imagine that Ananda was hanging around the palace teaching? So this was a Dhamma-rich environment that King Pasenadi and Queen Mallikā were in. And then I'll skip to, just so we make sure we get to it, the sutta that is much later in his relationship with the Buddha. And this ties back to Queen Mallikā, because she's often the one that, when he starts to go off the rails a little bit, she pulls him back towards the Buddha's teaching. So even though we went for refuge, it doesn't, just like all of us, we go for refuge, and there may be that steady constant within our hearts. Still our behaviors can waver, and our thinking can go awry, and we have to be called back to that refuge that we've established in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So here, this sutta, Kosala, and this one is in the Anguttara. Anguttara 1030. And there's a number of suttas right in there that King Pasenadi also appears in. So here he's been off at one of his many battles. It seems like a thing that kings do at that time. So at one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi, Jeta's Grove, and Anathapindika's monastery. Now at that time, King Pasenadi of Kosala returned from combat after winning a battle and succeeding in his objective. Then King Pasenadi of Kosala went to the monastery. He went by carriage as far as the terrain allowed, then descended and entered the monastery on foot. At that time, several mendicants were walking mindfully in the open air. King Pasenadi of Kosala went up to them and said, "Sirs, where is the Blessed One at present? The perfected one, the fully awakened one?" So, he's using these very respectful titles at this point. "For I want to see the Buddha." And they say, "Great king, the king is in his dwelling with the door closed. Approach it quietly without hurrying. Go to the porch, clear your throat, knock on the door. The Buddha will open the door." So they're instructing him in an appropriate way to act in a monastery, but also to respectfully approach the Buddha. And so the king does these things. And then King Pasenadi entered the Buddha's dwelling. He bowed with his head at the Buddha's feet. So that didn't happen in that previous encounter, but he immediately, rather than having polite conversation, he bows his head at the Buddha's feet, caressing them and covering them with kisses, and pronouncing his name, "Sir, I'm Pasenadi, King of Kosala. I'm Pasenadi, King of Kosala." And so he's announcing himself, but he's doing so in a manner that's reverential, respectful, and loving towards the Buddha. And the Buddha asks him, "But great king, for what reason do you demonstrate such utmost devotion for this body, conveying your manifest love?" And the king replies, "Sir, it's because of my gratitude and thanks for the Buddha that I demonstrate such utmost devotion, conveying my manifest love." The Buddha is practicing for the welfare and happiness of the people. And he's established many people in the noble system, that is, the principles of goodness and skillfulness. This is a reason that it demonstrates such utmost devotion for the Buddha, conveying my manifest love. And the suttas is full of these reasons why the king is so reverential to the Buddha and so appreciative. Okay, so you can see this kind of change of how the king approaches the Buddha. And there are several little stories along the way where he watches others who are being more respectful of the Buddha than of the king. And you can see how his mind begins to shift and see, oh, that's appropriate. It's really appropriate that the Buddhas and the Buddha's teachings, what the Buddha is offering is ever so much more than what the king is offering. The status of the Buddha as far as the impact, the world-turning Dhamma impact is so much greater than what the king has to offer. And the king begins to rejoice in this. He begins to rejoice. He has ministers that, because the king is encouraging others in his kingdom to also learn from the Buddha. And the queen is an exception in that he sometimes wants her to follow the Buddha, and sometimes he's just like, oh, come on, can't you just be my queen? And so sometimes he gets a little fed up with her. And that's part of the reason why I picked the story of Mallikā, is there's such a humanness to it. There's these human relations that are happening with her spouse, where they're both really care about the Dhamma and the Buddha, and they also have worldly duties, and they have a relationship with each other. And how do they navigate that? And of course, over time, Mallikā is putting the Buddha's teaching foremost, but she's not neglecting, she's acting kind within the setting as much as she can. But she owns that, oh, we'll get to it. Well, let me see. She owns that her behavior is not always on par with her aspirations, and that she has karma from past lives that is both connecting her to the husband and also connecting her with behaviors that she needs to overcome. She needs to see clearly. So one of the things to really look at with this collection of suttas is the humanness of it, that there are relationships, there are difficulties, there's love, there's connection, and there's thought. There's like this real thoughtfulness of, oh, okay, what is my priority here? And how do I honor my relationships, and how do I honor my priority with trust and devotion and practice of the Buddha's teaching? So here we are back with the Queen Mallikā. I think, let me see. I do want to get to this one, but I'd like to do it at the end. This goes back to King Pasenadi, looking at what it is those who love and don't love themselves. So I think this is a really important sutta for us to look at. But I'm going to first continue with Mallikā and the relationships. So this sutta, Born from the Beloved, is in the middle length discourses. You will also find this couple in at least King Pasenadi. I'm not sure if Mallikā is mentioned in the long discourses, and you will find them in the collected collections of discourses. You will also find their stories in there. So essentially, this couple crosses all 5 of the Nikayas. So they are an interesting look into relationships at the time of the Buddha. So here is this sutta. So I have heard, at one time the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove and Anathapindika's monastery. Now at that time, a certain householder's dear and beloved only child passed away. And after their death, he didn't feel like working or eating. He would go to the cremation ground and wail, "Where are you, my only child? Where are you, my only child?" When he went to the Buddha, bowed and sat down to one side. And the Buddha said to him, "Your faculties, householder, are those of one who is unstable in their own mind. There is a deterioration in your faculties." "And how, sir, could there be no deterioration of my faculties? For my dear and beloved only child has passed away. Since their death, I haven't felt like working or eating. I go to the cremation ground and wail, 'Where are you, my only child? Where are you, my only child?'" That's so true, householder. That's so true, householder. For our loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. So here the Buddha is talking about our attachments to each other, our attachments to specifically our family, and most specifically our children. We'll see also that this applies to husband, wife, partner, parents, others, in other suttas. But here we're talking about that love of an only child. And then it goes on, Sir, who on earth could ever think such a thing? For our loved ones are a source of joy and happiness. And so, disagreeing with the Buddha's statement, rejecting it, he got up from his seat and left. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of it, but he goes and he talks with others, and they say, oh, no, we agree with you. Our loved ones are a source of joy and happiness. Now, if we really look at what the Buddha's talking about, he's not saying there isn't joy and happiness in our relationships. In many places, he talks about householder joy, and he doesn't denigrate it. He doesn't say it's inappropriate to have joy in your family. What he talks about is it's inappropriate to have attachment. It's inappropriate in the sense of our liberation to have attachment. And so what a lot of these people at the time of the Buddha and now work with is, how do I love and find joy and happiness with my family while also not being attached? It is a tricky and liberating question to explore. And I suggest turning away from the question itself and into your practice and seeing what benefits and fruits are emerging from cultivation. But at this time, he's got, these people agreeing with him that no, the family is a source of joy and happiness. And we see this in a number of the suttas, how the grapevine gets back to the palace, and then we've got the king and queen talking about, the gossip that's going on. Oh, did you hear that this situation? And the Buddha was saying something about, here, I'll read it. Then King Pasenadi addressed Queen Mallikā. Mallikā, your ascetic Gautama, referring to the Buddha here, said this. And notice he's like, your ascetic. How many times do we do that in relationships? It's your person that did this. So your ascetic Gautama said this. Our loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. And Mallikā's reply is, if that's what the Buddha said, great king, then that's how it is. So she has a devotion, a faith base toward the Buddha and his teaching. And the sutta goes on. No matter what the ascetic Gautama said, Mallikā agrees with him. If that's what the Buddha said, great king, then that's how it is. You're just like a pupil who agrees with everything the tutor says. Go away, Mallikā, get out of here. So here's a little snapshot into some of that personal interaction where they're not always just lovey-dovey and devoted to each other, but they're also this human, no, I disagree with you. So then the Queen Mallikā addressed the Brahmin, Nalijanga, please, Brahmin, go to the Buddha, and in my name bow with your head to his feet, ask him if he is healthy and well, nimble, strong, and living comfortably. And then say, Sir, did the Buddha make this statement? Our loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. Remember well how the Buddha answers and tell it to me, for realized ones say nothing that is not so. Yes, ma'am, he replied. He went to the Buddha and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, he sat down to one side and said to the Buddha, and he repeats this question that Queen Mallikā has asked him to relay. And the Buddha says, that's right, Brahman, that's right. For our loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. And here's a way to understand how our loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. Once upon a time, right here in Savatthi, a certain woman's mother passed away. And because of that, she went mad and lost her mind. She went from street to street, from square to square, saying, "Has anyone seen my mother? Has anyone seen my mother?" And here's another way to understand how our loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. Once upon a time, right here in Savatthi, a certain woman's father, brother, sister, son, daughter, husband passed away. And because of that, she went mad and lost her mind. She went from street to street and from square to square saying, "Has anyone seen my husband or son or daughter or sister, brother, father? Has anyone seen them?" And here's another way to understand how loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. Once upon a time, right here in Savatthi, a certain man's mother, father, etc. So this is, saying that pretty much all people can, at the loss of their loved one, at their death, experience a form of madness, a deep grief. Once upon a time, right here in Savatthi, a certain woman went to live with her relative's family, but her relatives wanted to divorce her from her husband and give her to another who she didn't want. So she told her husband about this, but he cut her in two and disemboweled himself, thinking, "We shall be together after death." That's actually another way to understand how our loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. Then Nalijanga, the Brahmin, having approved and agreed with the Buddha, got up from his seat, went to Queen Mallikā and told her of all they had discussed. Then Queen Mallikā approached King Pasenadi and said to him, "What do you think, great king?" So before I get into what she's saying, it's not just the death, it's the actions that we may take out of our delusion on ourselves and our loved ones, thinking that is going to help us stay attached to those in a way that we want to continue after death in the next life. And the Buddha doesn't ever say that this is a wrong wish to be with those in the next life, but he does say it is a source of sorrow. So here, Queen Mallikā is bringing the argument to King Pasenadi and putting it in the form of those in his own household. "What do you think, great king? Do you love Princess Vajira?" I should have done these suttas in a slightly different order. So Princess Vajira is King Pasenadi's and Queen Mallikā's daughter. "Indeed I do, Mallikā. What do you think, great king? If she were to decay and perish, would sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress arise in you? If she were to decay and perish, my life would fall apart. How could sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress not arise in me?" And I think this is a very valid point the king is making. This is the way we're conditioned. This is the way that we understand, and if we have this attachment, of course my life would fall apart. This is what the Buddha was referring to when he said, our loved ones are a source of sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress. "What do you think, great king? Do you love Lady Vasabha?" So he goes through multiple relationships. General Vidu Daba. That's a tough one for me. So yes, and do you love me? Indeed, I do love you, Mallikā. What do you think, great king? If I were to decay and perish, would sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and distress arise in you? If you were to decay and perish, my life would fall apart. So he says the same thing. And she says, yeah, this is what the Buddha was referring to. So what do you think, great king? Do you love the realms of Kasi and Kosala? Indeed, I do, Mallikā. It's due to the bounty of Kasi and Kosala that we use sandalwood imported from Kasi and wear garlands and fragrance and makeup. So even when it's applied to our homes, our lands, our countries, these can be sources of sorrow, and it's around this attachment. So it's incredible, Mallikā. It's amazing how far the Buddha sees with penetrating wisdom. It seems to me, come Mallikā, rinse my hands. So he's asking basically to be purified. This is a ritual from that time period, and the Brahmanic upbringing. Then King Pasenadi got up from his seat, arranged his robes over one shoulder, raised his joined palms toward the Buddha, and expressed the heartfelt sentiment 3 times. Homage to the Blessed One, the Perfect One, the fully awakened Buddha. So this is our Namo Tassa that we do quite frequently. So you can see this movement in the king, and it's partly through Mallikā's efforts to bring the teaching to life and into his reality that he is able to do this. Now, there are also a number of times where he goes to the Buddha and the Buddha's like, you look a little bit off or disgruntled. And he's like, yeah, Mallikā's kind of misbehaving and blah, blah, blah. And so the king reconciles. And so the next sutta, yes, we do have time. The next sutta is actually one of those occasions. Oops, wait, that's the wrong direction. Maybe I don't have it up here. Pia, it's the one I want to get back to. Yeah, here we are. This is in the linked discourses, the Samyutta 3.16. And this is referring to the daughter that was just mentioned in the sutta I just read. At Savatthi, then King Pasenadi of Kosala went up to the Buddha, bowed and sat down to one side. I'm sorry, conflating a couple suttas here. And then a man went up to the king and whispered in his ear, Your Majesty, Queen Mallikā has given birth to a daughter. When this was said, King Pasenadi was disappointed. In the commentary, there's talk about a little bit of a rift, a disappointment in the queen as well at this point. But here it's just the king was disappointed. Then, knowing that King Pasenadi was disappointed on that occasion, the Buddha recited these verses. Well, some women are better than men, O ruler of the people, wise and virtuous, a devoted wife who honors her mother-in-law. And when she has a son, he becomes a hero, O Lord of the land. The son of such a blessed lady may even rule the realm. So, of course, we've got some gender roles happening in this sutta. But really what the king is saying here is, don't disparage having a daughter, because there is a real importance to having daughters. And in the commentary, it also talks about the ethics that the woman can carry, and that here, the wise and virtuous. So it's really about the characteristics of the person that this child becomes more than their gender. And there were many little cases like this. I want to make sure we have time to, let's see. Okay, I'll get to this one. It looks like I don't have the one about Mallikā's death pulled up right now. But these, let me get back on track here. So the Buddha is teaching about each person having this capacity, and regardless of their gender. And in other places, he also talks about that, regardless of their birth, I'm missing a critical one of the suttas here. There's so much that I wanted to pick from, and I basically spent so much time looking into it and loving the suttas themselves that I didn't make a nice cohesive package. So perhaps I'll do this one at another time as well, and have it really nicely lined out. And I'd like to do the same for the King Pasenadi. So what I'm going on about is that these relationships are more about the characteristics of the individuals. And the sutta that I left out is one of them is the queen goes to the Buddha, and she actually asks, it's the only sutta that it has the queen asking the question directly to the Buddha. And it might have been that it's kind of a little bit of an embarrassing question. And there's some guess that maybe it occurred not too long after she'd been picked by the king to become the chief queen. So she went to the Buddha and she wanted to know, well, why is it that some women, because this is her stage, so she's asking about women. Some women are beautiful, some are not. Some are wealthy, some are not. Some are in prestigious positions, and some are not. And the Buddha talks about karma and what may have occurred in past lives. And so she reflects, okay, well, I probably was arrogant and a little bit nasty in to other people in past lives, because I'm really not that great looking. But I was generous because I'm now wealthy, and I was sorry, I'm drawing a blank now. Oh, not jealous. I think it is. I want to double check that, but I think that was the characteristic, which is why that I have this renown as the chief queen now. And from that, she then endeavors to practice good, wholesome things, so that in future lives she comes into good states, and she's hoping also to go back up into heavenly realms, which the commentary says is what eventually happened to her after this life. More details there we won't go into. And then before I get to this last sutta, I do want to say that King Pasenadi was also, several times had asked about attachment to those things and people and situations. So he also was hearing this Dhamma and working with it. And yet, what he was with the Buddha at the time that he learned of Queen Mallikā's death. And it doesn't say, whether that was expected or unexpected, just that a messenger came up and whispered in his ear, just like in the last one, the messenger had said, Queen Mallikā's born a daughter, whispered in the ear, Queen Mallikā has died. And at that point, the king sorrows, and the Buddha talks again about that attachment. It's not that the love is the difficulty, it's the attachment. But here is the last one we'll do today, and this is King Pasenadi, specifically talking about going back to the sense of self-love, whether we love ourselves or care for ourselves. Loved. It's in the linked discourses, the Anguttara 3.4. And I'm hoping maybe we'll scrape out all of the suttas I mentioned and put them on the YouTube channel as links to the Sutta Central, so that you can pull them up again, because I know it's quite a whirlwind I'm giving today. Loved. At Savatthi. Seated to one side, King Pasenadi said to the Buddha, "Just now, sir, as I was in private retreat, this thought came to mind. Who are those who love themselves? And who are those who don't love themselves?" Then it occurred to me, those who do bad things by way of body, speech, and mind don't love themselves. Even though they may say, I love myself, they don't really. We're talking about our behaviors here. Do I really act like I love myself? Why is that? It's because they treat themselves like an enemy. That's why they don't love themselves. They treat themselves like an enemy. Those who do good things by way of body, speech, and mind do love themselves. Even though they may say, I don't love myself, they really do. Why is that? It's because they treat themselves like a loved one. That's why they do love themselves. And this is another spot that I highly recommend as a takeaway for your own contemplation. Why is it that when we act in wholesome ways by our actions, by our speech, and even how we think, why is that an act of loving ourselves? Why is that treating ourselves like a loved one? And why, when we do unwholesome things by our actions, by our speech, and by our thinking, why is it that we're actually treating ourselves like an enemy? This is a really, really powerful contemplation to do. So here's the Buddha's reply. That is so true, great king. That's so true, said the Buddha. And he repeated the king's statement, adding, if you knew yourself as beloved, you'd not yoke yourself to wickedness. For happiness is not easy to find by someone who does bad deeds. When you're seized by the Terminator as you give up your human life, what can you call your own? What do you take when you go? What goes with you like a shadow that never leaves? Both the good and the bad that a mortal does in this life is what they can call their own. That's what they take when they go. That's what goes with them, like a shadow that never leaves. That's why you should do good, investing in the future life. The good deeds of sentient beings support them in the next world. So here the Buddha is putting it in a very poetic form, that if you really know yourself as loved, as beloved, then you would not sully, degenerate, yoke, connect, put a yoke on. You would not yoke yourself to wickedness, to what's unwholesome. And you would understand that happiness is not easy to find by someone who's mired in, seeped in these unwholesome qualities. Because when we die, he says, when you're seized by the Terminator, when you give up this bodily form as a human, what is it that you call your own? It's your actions. It's what you've done. It's your intentions. It's the intentions and how they moved you throughout this life. That's what goes with you. And so that whatever perhaps we complete the path of liberation and there is no more becoming. But for the majority of us, we're going to continue along this path in future lives. And when we do so, we'd like to seed that with the wholesome. So if we care about what's next for us, we should really care about how we're behaving now. How are we cultivating now so that we are beloved? We are beloved by ourselves in our actions, in our speech, and in our mental world, our thoughts, our emotive qualities. So this is the set of suttas I wanted to look at today, really starring Mallikā and also her relationship with King Pasenadi, and more importantly, their relationship with the Buddha and how the Buddha informed their relationship. Queen Mallikā also was not the only wife. There were other wives. One of them was maybe would be considered the next wife down, was one from the Buddha's own clan. And it turned out that he'd wanted a wife from the Buddha's clan, and that the Sakyans ended up giving him, without having the story up, I think that she was a servant, or I think she may have actually been a slave, or born of a slave. Okay, no, she was born of a slave to one of the cousins, probably of the Buddha. And so she was of lower status within that clan. Yet she bore a son to the Buddha, which, sorry, she erased that. She bore a son to King Pasenadi. And when that woman came in, one of the things they say is that Mallikā didn't have a adversarial relationship with her. She actually really supported. And when the king found out, that the wife was actually fairly low born, and he kind of wanted to put her down, both Mallikā and the Buddha said, no, 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 no. It's not by the birth that you should be, doing this. This is now your relation. This is your wife, and now this is your son. So really, this today was a collection of suttas about family relations and the placement of the Dhamma in directing our family relations, taking away the attachment, but really honoring and respecting each other along the path, and most specifically, really honoring and respecting ourselves in the path development, putting that foremost in the sense of love. And that will drive your actions, your speech, and your thinking towards others. And you will bring more safety to the world and more happiness into your heart. So that's the reflection for today. I'm going to stop the sharing and see if there are any questions. And there may or may not be. That's perfectly fine. Okay, stop. I see how to share something else. There must be a stop sharing button here somewhere too. Oh, here it is. Different part of the screen. All right, so I'll also check on the YouTube. There is somebody watching on YouTube as well. So if there are any questions, we do have a little bit of time. Otherwise, welcome to just take the last bit here for your own internal self-reflection on these suttas. I think they bring up some really powerful points for us of inquiry, especially as we navigate the modern world and modern families. All right, not seeing any questions in YouTube or Zoom land. I will close for today. I think it would be lovely to, as King Pasenadi did, to end today with the, not the Namo Tassa, but the 3 bows. So I'm going to turn to bow to the Buddha. Arahang Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. All right. Well, thank you for joining in this exploration today. Have a beautiful day or night of practice wherever you are in the world.